Pepper is deeply loved and missed every single day. But for 40 years, nobody even knew her daughter's name. In November 1985, a hunter walked into the woods at Bear Brook State Park in Allenstown, New Hampshire, and found something that would haunt investigators for the next 4 decades. A steel drum, rusted, sitting in the brush near a burned-out store at the edge of a trailer park. Inside was a discovery that would change everything and raise questions nobody could answer. No identification. No missing persons report that matched. No family that came forward. Just 2 victims and no names. Investigators worked the case for years. Composite sketches. Dental records. Flyers sent to hospitals and police departments across New England. Nothing came back. Then in May 2000, 15 years after the first barrel was found, a state police investigator retracing the original crime scene found a second drum roughly 300 feet from the first. It had been sitting there the entire time. Through every search, every evidence sweep, every visit by investigators and journalists. 2 more victims inside. The same unanswered questions. The same silence. For victims. 2 barrels. No names on any of them. And for the next 15 years, that was exactly where the case stayed. For the next 15 years, investigators worked the case with almost nothing to guide them. Composite sketches of the woman and the girl circulated across New England. Dental records went through every available database. Flyers reached police departments, hospitals, and dental offices from New Hampshire to Massachusetts. Not a single response came back. When CODIS launched in the late 1990s, the FBI's National DNA Database, the cold case unit ran the Bear Brook profiles every few years as new entries came in. The remains had been sealed in a steel drum long enough that the DNA they produced was limited and degraded. Without a usable match on the other end, the database had nothing to return. Each check came back the same way. Empty. No families to interview. No locations to search. No thread to pull. Then in May 2000, 15 years after the first barrel was found, a state police investigator retracing the original crime scene stopped at a section of brush roughly 300 feet from where the first drum had been recovered. There was a second barrel sitting in the undergrowth. Rusted. Never buried. It had been there since the beginning, through every search, every evidence sweep, every time investigators and journalists had walked that ground. 2 more victims inside. The original crime scene had been wrong from the start. This was never a double homicide. It had always been 4 victims. And after 15 more years of searching, nobody could name a single one of them. What investigators knew about the 4 victims came down to estimates. The woman found in the first barrel was somewhere between 23 and 33 years old. The girl with her was between 5 and 11. In the second barrel, the younger girl was a toddler, somewhere between 1 and 4. The older one fell somewhere between the toddler and the girl from the first barrel. Investigators called her the middle child. That was all she had. Not a name. Not a family. A position. All 4 had been dead for years before the first barrel surfaced. Based on physical evidence and known timelines, investigators placed the death somewhere between 1978 and 1981. For victims, the same remote location, the same deliberate concealment, but the most significant detail wasn't what connected them, it was what separated them. DNA testing confirmed that the middle child was not related to the woman or the girls in the first barrel. She had not come from the same family. She was a different child entirely, from a different background, placed in that barrel with people she had no biological connection to. No missing persons report anywhere in the country matched her. Somewhere in the United States, families had stopped hearing from these people. They had written letters that went unanswered, made phone calls that were never returned. They had spent years filling the silence with explanations that had nothing to do with what actually happened. They had no idea their family members were in those barrels, and investigators had no way to reach them. If you have been following this case from the beginning, now is a good time to subscribe so you never miss an identification like this one. Stay with us, because what comes next is where this case finally starts to break open. In October 2002, a woman named Eunsoon Jun was reported missing from her home in Richmond, California. She was 45 years old and worked as a chemist. Her husband, a man going by the name Larry Vanner, walked into the Richmond Police Department and filed the report himself. Weeks later, during a follow-up interview at the station, he confessed. Eunsoon's body was found buried in the basement of their home on Belmont Drive, concealed under cat litter. Contra Costa County prosecutors charged him with first-degree murder. The case was heard in Martinez, the county seat. In 2003, he entered a no-contest plea and was sentenced to 15 years to life in the California state prison system. Then investigators ran his fingerprints. Larry Vanner matched Bob Evans. Bob Evans matched Curtis Kimball. Curtis Kimball matched Gordon Jenson. For names, one set of prints. Every identity had been taken from a man who had died or gone missing. Nobody who had ever lived with him, worked alongside him, or shared a home with him had known who he actually was. Not one person across any of those lives. Employment records and utility accounts then placed him in southern New Hampshire in the early 1980s, in Allenstown, Hooksett, and Manchester. At the same time, investigators believed the 4-barrel victims had been killed. In January 2017, New Hampshire authorities formally named him as the prime suspect in all 4 murders. There was one problem. He had died on December 28, 2010, in High Desert State Prison, lung cancer, COPD, and pneumonia. He was buried in a prison cemetery under the name Larry Vanner. And nobody, not the prison, not the state of California, not a single person who had ever crossed his path, could say who he actually was. Identifying a dead man who had spent 35 years erasing himself required something no traditional investigation could provide. It required someone willing to build his identity from scratch, not from records he had left behind, but from the DNA of people he had never met. In 2015, a woman named Barbara Raventer took on that task. Raventer was a retired patent attorney with a PhD in biology who had built a second career in forensic genetic genealogy. Working with the New Hampshire Attorney General's office and the FBI, she uploaded the suspect's DNA profile to GMatch, a public database where people voluntarily share ancestry test results to connect with relatives they have never known. The suspect had never submitted a DNA sample to any ancestry platform. But somewhere in that database, a distant cousin had. And from that cousin, a family tree could be built, branch by branch, generation by generation, until it led back to one man. What made this significant was the timing. In 2015, genetic genealogy had never been publicly used in a criminal investigation. The technique that would later become nationally known through the Golden State Killer case was being quietly developed right here, to name a man already dead and buried in a California prison under someone else's name. Raventer found distant cousin matches and built outward through birth certificates, marriage records, census data, and obituaries spanning Colorado and surrounding states. The process took months of cross-referencing. The tree narrowed to one man. Born December 23, 1943 in Denver, Colorado. Raised in Arizona. United States Navy, 1961 to 1967, 6 years as an electrician in the Pacific, honorably discharged. He married, had 4 children, and built what looked from the outside like an ordinary life. In 1975, he was arrested for burning one of his sons with cigarettes. His wife left with the children. And from that point forward, he walked away from his own name and never looked back. His name was Terry Peder Rasmussen. This case is one of the longest cold case identification efforts ever documented. If this is the kind of story you come here for, subscribe and hit the bell so you are here when the next one drops. Now let's get to the names. Before Rasmussen was Terry Peder Rasmussen, he was Bob Evans. And as Bob Evans, he had been living in Manchester, New Hampshire with a 23-year-old woman named Denise Bowden and her 6-month-old daughter. Around Thanksgiving 1981, Denise vanished. Her family never reported her missing. They assumed she had left town to escape financial trouble and start over somewhere new. There was no investigation, no search. She simply stopped existing in the public record, and the man who had last been seen with her kept moving. He kept her daughter. For the next 5 years, Rasmussen moved the girl through Arizona, Texas, and California, changing names and locations every year or two, enrolling her in schools under different last names, telling anyone who asked that she was his. He called her Lisa. In May 1985 he was arrested in Cypress, California under the name Curtis Kimball for driving under the influence with the child in the back seat. He failed to appear in court and moved on again. By January 1986 he was at the Holiday Host RV Park in Scotts Valley, California under the name Gordon Jenson. That June he told the park owners he would return and walked away. The girl was 6 years old. A couple at the park took her in and eventually adopted her through the Santa Cruz County court system. She grew up in the Bay Area not knowing her real name, her real mother, or what had happened to either of them. DNA analysis later confirmed she was not Rasmussen's biological daughter. Genealogical research traced her family back to Manchester, New Hampshire. Her name was Dawn Bowden. Her mother was Denise. By the time Dawn learned the truth, the answers she had spent her entire life without had arrived decades too late to change anything. Denise Bowden has never been found. Rebecca Heath was a librarian at the Wigan Memorial Library in Stratham, New Hampshire. After her shifts ended, she went home and spent her evenings at her computer, searching ancestry databases, genealogy forums, and missing persons boards, looking for anyone searching for a relative whose age and disappearance matched the Bear Brook victims. Nobody asked her to do this. Nobody paid her. She just kept going, night after night, with the publicly available details of the case and nothing else. Most nights led nowhere. In October 2018, after months of searching, she found a post on an ancestry forum. A woman in California was looking for a family member named Sarah McQuarters, born in 1977. The age fit. The timeline fit. Heath's research and the forensic genealogy work running through official channels arrived at the same conclusion within weeks of each other, independently, from completely different directions. In June 2019, New Hampshire Attorney General Gordon MacDonald stood before a room where victims' family members sat in the front row and read 3 names publicly for the first time, 34 years after the first barrel was found. The woman was Marlies Elizabeth Honeychurch, born 1954 in Fairfield, Connecticut. She had been in a relationship with Rasmussen and moved with him and her daughters to New Hampshire. Her daughters were Marie Elizabeth Vaughn, born December 1971, and Sarah Lynn McQuarters, born December 1977. All 3 were last seen around Thanksgiving 1978. Marlies' family had spent 40 years writing letters that were never answered. 3 victims had names. But the little girl in the second barrel, the one DNA had already confirmed came from a completely different family, was still unidentified. And her story was more complicated than anyone had anticipated. 4 years after Marlies, Marie, and Sarah were named, the little girl investigators had called the middle child remained completely unknown. No missing persons report matched her. No family had ever come forward. No database had returned her name. In January 2024, the New Hampshire State Police Cold Case Unit partnered with the DNA Doe Project, a volunteer organization founded in 2017 that uses genetic genealogy to identify unknown remains. For the Bear Brook case, they assembled a team of more than 40 genealogists, researchers, and DNA specialists, none of them paid. The remains had been sealed inside a steel drum for decades. Bacteria, moisture, and chemical breakdown had degraded the DNA to a point where standard extraction methods failed repeatedly. The University of North Texas Center for Human Identification ran multiple rounds of testing before a modified protocol produced a partial profile, limited, degraded, but enough to work with. That profile was uploaded to ancestry databases. Distant matches appeared. The team began building a family tree outward from those matches, verifying every connection through birth certificates, death records, obituaries, and county courthouse filings across Texas, California, Colorado, and the Pacific Northwest. Over more than a year of work, the tree grew to roughly 25,000 people. In June 2025, it led to a family in East Texas. Her mother was Pepper Reed, born in 1952 in Orange County, Texas. Reed had been in a relationship with Rasmussen in California in the mid-1970s. Her family last saw her around Christmas 1975. She was pregnant at the time. They assumed she had chosen to move on. They never heard from her again. A birth certificate from Orange County, California confirmed that a girl had been born there in 1976. The father listed was Terry Peder Rasmussen. The child's name was Ray Rasmussen. DNA extracted from the middle child was compared against a sample from one of Rasmussen's confirmed biological relatives. The match held. A Y-DNA test drawn from Rasmussen's 2010 autopsy confirmed paternity. Ray Rasmussen was between 2 and 4 years old when she was killed by her own father. Her mother had most likely been killed by the same man. There was no one left to report her missing. No one who knew she was gone. She had been in that barrel for roughly 40 years before anyone on Earth knew her name. On September 5, 2025, Senior Assistant Attorney General Benjamin Agati and Attorney General John Fermella announced her identification at a press conference in Concord, New Hampshire. Detective Sergeant Christopher Elphick, who had worked the case for years, said they never forgot Ray. He said the case had passed through the hands of many investigators, all of whom felt the weight of speaking for those who no longer could. Naming her, he said, brought a sense of justice, but also reminded everyone of the questions that remained. All 4 victims finally had names. But the case did not end there. Terry Peder Rasmussen never confessed to the Bear Brook killings. He never told anyone where Pepper Reed or Denise Bowden were buried. Investigators and the FBI searched property records and land parcels across multiple states under every alias he had ever used. They found nothing. Pepper Reed has been missing since approximately 1975. Denise Bowden has been missing since Thanksgiving 1981. Neither has ever been found. Rasmussen's confirmed victims number 5, Marlies Honeychurch, Marie Vaughn, Sarah McQuarters, Ray Rasmussen, and Eunsoon Jun. Investigators believe the true number is higher. He operated in at least 6 states under at least 5 aliases over 3 decades. The full scope of what he did may never be known. The Bear Brook podcast, produced by New Hampshire Public Radio and reported by Jason Moon, brought the case to more than 20 million listeners and helped sustain the public attention that supported the ongoing identification work across multiple years. At the September 2025 press conference, a victim witness specialist read a statement from Pepper Reed's family in East Texas. Pepper is deeply loved and missed every single day. Though we did not have an opportunity to meet Ray, she is cherished just as much in our hearts. If this case stayed with you, subscribe to Kairo True Crime Breakdown so you never miss a solved cold case. Every name recovered. Every case closed. We cover them all. We go beyond the surface, always.